Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Josh Cooperman. I'm the host and publisher of Convo by Design, a podcast for the design and architecture space. Um, we started putting these conversations together. By the way, this is the showroom. It is a partnership between Walker Zanger and Convo by Design. We started putting these together at a time where you're all familiar with it because we all got Zoom at the same time, where we could not meet in person anymore and have these conversations. So now we've been having these virtually, and what it's done is it's sort of served as a temporary placeholder for those events that we love sitting in the audience and seeing these panels in person. So thank you very much for joining us. If you like this conversation, and I hope you do, you will be able to listen to it again by subscribing to Convo by Design. And if you do subscribe, you can find the podcast everywhere you get your favorite shows. And if you do subscribe, you will receive automatic updates the moment these conversations are published. So please do subscribe. Down at the bottom, you will notice the chat feature. If you have any questions during our conversation, for John, for myself, for Erica, please go ahead and type those in, and we will address those as they make sense during the course of our conversation. With that, wanted to welcome John Marvel to the showroom. John, thanks for coming out today. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Josh, and thank you for all you're doing for the design community and for keeping us spiritually aligned with each other and what we do. And blessings on the show. May it go on forever.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. With that, I kind of wanted, where I like to start is with a good origin story. I've read your background and your bio. I think it's amazing. Can you share sort of how you got into the business and how you crafted your firm into what you wanted it to be, what it is today?
We all have our unique starting points, and I feel very privileged in with both my parents um, being practicing professionals in architecture and planning, respectively. My father, an architect in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I was born, and my mother, a social planner, also in San Juan, and uh, they really integrated themselves into the Puerto Rican community with as an American family. But I was born and raised there, and really grew up in a neighborhood that was by Puerto Rican standards middle class, which would put that in a poverty section within the United States. And so I grew up in a with a network of people that was very important to me. As a child, exploring and having no relatives of blood relatives, but having an interconnected network of neighbors that was so vital, and the sharing that happens, and the living, basically living outside all the time, but having professional parents. I understood early on that architecture was something that I wanted to do since I was probably 4 years old, visiting job sites with my father on Saturdays, which is when we got to see our father, was on the weekends because he worked like crazy, like architects do. And so we'd go to construction sites with him. I've got two brothers, and we'd go, watch the workmen pour cement into wood formwork, and then they'd peel off the boards, and then you'd see liquid turn to solid practically in front of your eyes. And it was, I really associate the mixing of concrete and watching ingredients that were all separate that turn into a soup that then turned into a solid piece of something. I didn't really know what it was as a child, but a foundation or a wall of poured concrete is so powerful to experience. So I had that kind of firsthand experience. I was very privileged, as I said, to have that side. And my mother, being a social planner, integrating herself with the communities, the informal communities in Puerto Rico, documenting neighborhoods that had no streets, running water, electricity, but documenting who's living there, making those people feel important, giving them leadership. So I grew up in this kind of parallel universe of design and social thinking at the same time. And I, as a point of origin, I and particularly in Puerto Rico in a tropical environment where indoor and outdoor is blended together, and I couldn't think of a better place. So I was very, very lucky.
With that, I think it's really interesting as you have this specialty for city planning, right? And I'm hearing you, the artistic description of just of concrete going from a liquid to a solid and then peeling back the wood forms and seeing what you have. Isn't that exactly what a city planner does? Is, you know, or someone who looks at the planning of an organization and a group and figures out, okay, here's what we have to work with. Here's infill opportunity. Here's how the city is changing. I've said this for years. I view architects and designers as futurists. You know, designers on a much narrower scale of time, architects on a much longer scale of time. You're designing not for 25 or 30 years, but for 50, 75, 100, 200 years. You're looking at what it's going to be. I'm curious, at this point in time, in a, you know, I know that we're all really tired of talking about COVID and the pandemic. I know that I certainly am. At the same time, we have to keep talking about it because our society, the way that we live, work, cohabitate, it's all changing, and it's changing in real time, and I can't remember the last time it did so in my lifetime. So I'm curious your perspective on what an interesting time it is to be living as someone who is so deep in city planning, as an architect, as someone who is crafting structures that people live in. Because remember, I mean, we're not crafting buildings to just sit back and look at them. These are to be lived in and used, right? I'm curious
Right.
about your take on where we are today and what the modern city looks like now and in the very near future.
You know, this you're opening up a world of and a discussion that's so important to be having on all levels, and with all sectors of our society. And from an urban design, planning, architecture perspective, the discussions that we are having. When I say we, I'm part of a team. I'm not alone, and the team. The we aspect is so beneficial because we're very collaborative in our practice, and we have urban design, planning, landscape architecture, interior design, all combined, and we sit around. Now we sit around looking at each other on screens, but we children, and we also love getting together. And you know, the discussion today is the 20-minute city. You know, we want to have fully integrated neighborhoods, and that you can, within a 20-minute walk of where you live and where you work and where you like to play, where you go to school, where you and where you recreate, all of those elements ideally want to be within a 20-minute walk, so that we don't have to get in a car, we don't have to put the pressure on public transportation, and that we can walk, bicycle. It's healthier for our environment. And we've seen the carbon in our atmospheres go down 7 to 8% globally with the pandemic. And so this all speaks to a radically different world than the one that we're accustomed to, where there's bedroom communities, and then there's work areas, and then there's places of you know, the zoning that New York City and many other cities was based on was all use zoning, so that that for many reasons and very efficient ways, and separating the people from the manufacturing and industrial areas, and Midtown, very different kind of dynamic from the living areas around it. I think we're going to see a more integrated environment, and at a big scale, so that we're going to want to adjust our zoning and city planning. We'll be able to recalibrate a little bit on what can be done where, and then within a more smaller scale, building by building, we're going to see buildings that are going to be more mixed use, where you have people working down below and living up above. And there are many, many successful examples of that kind of a structure. But when we talk about, hotels may be more of a mixed use as well. And we look at the ground floor pedestrian experience. We see a lot of vacant retail spaces. On the other hand, we see a lot of vibrant food and beverage places in New York City where they've spilled out onto the sidewalks, and it's this very dynamic public space now. So we're always going to be optimistic as a profession. So you're going to hear me say that the pandemic has been the toughest thing humanity has had to face, and we need to acknowledge that. We all need to pat ourselves on the back and help each other out and work on this together, not separately. But I see a bright future because it's allowing us to rethink and do pilot projects and test things that might have been more difficult in the past.
Curious, sort of piggybacking on that a little bit, I've said this before, but I think it's really interesting it bears repeating. When this whole thing started, people would say, well, these are unprecedented times. And I was one of them. And then as things went on, I started to realize these are not unprecedented times at all. We've had a pandemic. Just because we weren't there, we didn't live through it, but it happened. We've had racial and social injustice issues. We've had fires, floods, earthquakes. I mean, you name it. I can't think economic crisis. I can't think of anything actually that has happened this time around that hasn't happened before. What's interesting though, is if you look back at 1920 and you see sort of how the Spanish flu pandemic rolled out, the changes that were made in primarily residential architecture and design, it was really interesting, the things that changed. I'm curious, this time around, you talk about mixed use and you talk about the overall concepts. Has this changed the way that you think about architecture, that you think about urban planning, that you think about what's currently, just for example, millions and millions of square feet of office space that, especially in New York City, especially, in downtown LA, in other major metropolitan cities, that has to be adjusted, because I don't think anyone believes that everyone's going back to work again. So I'm curious, how has just this changed the manner in which you think about architecture, design, and urban planning?
And such a powerful way to think about our situation is to bring up the Spanish flu. And I'll use the example that's cited by many, that when you look at during the Spanish flu, they didn't close down the theater district. Broadway continued. Today we shut it down, and that's why when I say that humanity's never faced anything like this, it's because we basically shut down our systems. We didn't necessarily shut everything down in 1918, 1920. They kept going, and then when they and so it was easier to bounce back from that moment. The world really shut down for a period of time that was devastating for so many people, physically, mentally, and economically, and so we have to really take a pause to say, yes, humanity's been through a number of things, and the New Yorker in me says, yeah, I was 10 blocks away from 9/11. I was right on the edge of Brooklyn at Superstorm Sandy. So I saw, and New York bounced back, of course, from both of those. But this is going to be this is a much more thought-provoking bouncing back, and it's going to definitely allow us to look for opportunities that we overlooked before. And I, from a city planning perspective, I think we're going to be seeing um, a desire for more flexibility with how we use our spaces and our both inside and outside, so that all of a sudden a parking space for your car is incredibly valuable if you're a commuter and you come to work by car, or if you need your car as a necessity. Many people do, but that parking space has a whole other value to a neighborhood, to allow either children to play, schools to open up, food and beverage businesses to open up, theaters to have outdoor. So that part, I'd let you know that parking space needs to be flexible. That space, our streets need to be flexible. Our sidewalks need to be more flexible, and our public transportation system, which keeps on humming along, needs to be more flexible too. So buses are much more flexible than subways, for example. And so I think we're probably going to deploy a lot of different kinds of public transportation, much more multimodal than we were before. The shared vehicle is going to become more important. And so the flexibility that I use of that parking space is really an example about citywide need for spaces that can be flexible. And we did a study, and we'll talk about it later, like Union Square, about how that's an example.
And speaking of that, it's funny too, John, because you're talking about, as an architect, you're gonna stay positive and come from the optimistic side. I'm gonna double down on the optimistic side, and I'm gonna challenge your optimism and raise you a little bit more in the context of. So here we are, really interesting times that we're living in, and I want to put it in a different kind of context and look at it a little bit differently. You had mentioned Puerto Rico, and when they have all of their challenges, earthquakes, tsunami, power outages, flooding, just disaster, right? And folks on the mainland are saying, wow, I feel terrible for them, but thank goodness that wasn't us, right? And then you have what happened in Texas a few weeks ago. And I think it sort of raises the point and challenges all of us in the design space to think about things a little bit differently and realize that the moment something happens once, the chances for it to happen again are so much greater. And I think it would be naive. I'm in Southern California. And it would be naive of me to say, well, those fires were really terrible, but it happened and it's not going to happen again. 20 years ago, maybe we could say that, but now it happens every year. Earthquakes, I could say, well, we had that bad one and it's not going to happen again. You can't say that. Hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, floods, it's all going to happen again. What's interesting, though, is how climate change, and this is not a political conversation, right? Climate change is not a political issue. It's like either you believe in science or you're a flat earther who doesn't. Pick one, and it's cool, whichever way you want to go. But if you're in the design space, you have to look at these things because they directly affect the industry and the way we live and the way you work. So I'm curious, with all of the work that you've done in Puerto Rico, when you look at the mainland, when you look at the US mainland and say climate change, here is how our design is being affected by that, and here's what we're doing to address it. Now you add in a pandemic, and look, I don't want to be negative here, but it is positive to think that it will absolutely happen again. How do architects and designers help their clients plan for that?
And we're scrambling to to meet the needs of the society in which we live in. I think the design professions are all deeply engaged in helping, actively helping our not only our clients, but on a pro bono basis, many other very needy communities. And one of the things that we're learning is, and I use the word flexibility when with respect to city planning and urban design. There's another word that we all use, resiliency, that really needs to be put into practice in a deeper way than we're seeing it, in order to be in order to adapt to the hits that we're taking. And resiliency is a way of saying, we're going to, in order to survive whatever's coming our way, we've got to integrate ourselves with our environment a little bit better than, and not have a confrontational outside inside, or not see it as a battle, but you've got to go with the flow with nature, because nature is much more powerful than we will ever be. So with all the technology that we can harness, we're never going to outsmart nature. So we really have to we've got to work with nature, and we've got to really be more humble about our sense of selves. We're so omnipresent and ever powerful in this kind of in the industrialized world. The less industrialized worlds actually suffered much less during the pandemic, because they were outdoors much more than we are as a society, and other reasons as well. But I think let's just talk to our industrial world in which we live and work and play at the moment, and will continue, because we know density is a healthy thing for our planet. We know that by clustering where people live and work, and frees up a lot of land for bouncing back in a carbon neutral way, a healthier planet. So this issue of working not in combat with nature, but working with nature, it means decentralization. We can bring up a lot of different terms and examples of what that will play out in our society. Decentralizing the power sources in Puerto Rico was very, very important, and that's why renewable energy on everybody's rooftop, whether you're at home or in your business, is with your own battery storage for the electricity that you produce, is a very healthy thing for Puerto Rico. It doesn't mean you're going to cut out all the power plants, because we need what we call robust energy for manufacturing. We need it for hospitals, we need it healthcare and all the transportation, but we can decentralize our energy systems. And I think that's where the lessons learned from the Texas polar freeze tragedy was it's a whole other issue that we don't have to talk about right now, but they made choices because they were not investing they took shortcuts in all of their distribution systems, whether it was gas, oil, even they took shortcuts in the windmills that were generating, because they didn't put in the proper element in there to keep the system heated while it was running. So that was a lack of an investment, because they were trying to cut down the price of electricity, and the free market system overran the larger needs of humanity. So we're all going to need to make it that extra investment in ourselves, and an extra investment with this relationship with nature, so that we can survive these devastating and tragic elements, whether it's storms or pandemics or fires, that we're going to see more frequently, for sure.
Isn't it interesting that it kind of feels to me like when you look at, and by the way, for the sake of this conversation, everything else outside of talking about Puerto Rico a little bit, but everything else really is mainland US. You know, that's kind of what we're
We
talking about here.
we call it the lower 48, Josh. We say lower 48 because, you know, mainland US could be, well,
Is that a
anyway.
negative thing? Is that a negative
No,
connotation?
because you know, mainland, it just means, you know, the main land. It's like the main man, the main land. You can't, it skews the conversation when we say the mainland because everybody else is the less land. So we have to, that's why I like to say the lower 48.
All right, John, semantics got me again. Okay, well, that notwithstanding, so what's really interesting too is it's reminiscent to me of the Industrial Revolution, to see all of this. And I'm not going into a history lesson here. I'm really not, folks. Just stay with me. But it does feel interesting how there's been accelerated movement and momentum into moving into what I've been calling forever the flyover design states, or design cities rather. So you've got, Austin, Dallas, Memphis, Nashville, Kansas City, Boulder. You've got all these cities where people who have realized I can go live wherever I want to live now and still work remotely, virtually, or, a hybrid of in-office and remote work. And you talk about the value of density. And with that, we're having new areas where people are now going to grow the density within those spaces, which offers an opportunity. Living in Los Angeles, there's really not much of an opportunity to change the landscape of LA right now. It's not going to happen quickly. You can do some infill projects, you can take some things down and build them back up, and that happens all the time. Manhattan, New York, 5 boroughs, same thing. You're not really going to change the way that looks dramatically overnight. In some of these other cities, though, you get to a point in Austin where it has been completely impacted by that. Yes. You talk about a 20-minute city. Austin, I love Austin, by the way, but I believe that and I think they've done great things there, but I do believe that they've kind of missed the opportunity to turn it into that 20-minute city you talk about. Mm-hmm. There are some other cities, though, that really do have that opportunity, and I'm curious your take on how to do it smartly. And when it comes to urban planning, I think everyone that I've ever spoken to in design is always frustrated, regardless of where they live, at the inability to work cohesively. So that being said, when you view a city like a Memphis or a Nashville or a Kansas City, one whose story has not yet been written in the same way as in LA or New York, how do you envision the growth? And I say that now because the next thing that we do, I'm really excited, is to sort of take a deep dive into some of your projects that I think will sort of drive the points home.
Okay, and so yes, I think that our cities are going to be for the long haul our savior. It's the way to go, and whether it's a large city or a medium-sized city or a small city, it's respecting the public domain. Cities offer us a contrast between the public domain and the more privatized spaces, and cities bring out I think the best of everybody, because we have to share that public domain. We have to be more considerate of how we live and work, and we have to be more collaborative. You can't just stake out your turf and say, this is mine. It's harder to, right? And it's easier to do it in a more suburban or rural area. And so cities really force a sense of collaborativeness, which I think I think we'd all agree that collaboration is a positive thing, and that the mid to smaller cities saw because of the way infrastructure was planned with highways and the large shopping centers, the malls, taking away the pulse out of the downtown. So you see in the smaller cities today a lot of empty storefronts, and I think we're going to respect a lot more the powerful nature of the mom and pop shop, which is now a rare breed because we've all learned to order our necessities online in the pandemic, and so retail is taking a big hit, but cities can do things to bring back the mom and pop shop with tax incentives. With there's a whole pro forma that cities can go through without taking a big dent in their financial resources, about encouraging entrepreneurship, encouraging young people to take a risk and open up an enterprise of one form or the other, so I think we're going to see the healthier smaller cities and mid-sized cities because of that wonderful term that we use, mixed use. We want to have mixed use. We want to have people of all shapes and sizes and ages and colors all working together. And the cities are the best mixer of all, for the reasons I suggested before, in terms of the public domain becomes really important, and co-working and co-living. We're going to see some wonderful changes, I think, and the winners will be the small to mid-sized cities. I think the larger cities have a dynamic of their own, but again, because I think people are not going to be driving to go to the mall. They're going to be walking to do some shopping or get it delivered, as we've been seeing in the recent past year. So I love that you love Austin, and that I too feel like every moment that you can sort of take a pause and say, how can we do this better, is a moment of opportunity. And sometimes they get missed, but sometimes they get taken too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Erica, I think this is probably a good time to transition over to imagery. John, we're going to start with the Pier House, One Hotel. Can you, it's a beautiful structure. Can you take us through sort of the origin of the project?
This is a project that had its origins about 25, 30 years ago, with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey owning all of the waterfront land practically in all of New York City. And in the case of this particular site, where Pier House and One Hotel sit in what's known as Brooklyn Bridge Park. Brooklyn Bridge Park was started as a neighborhood initiative with some members of the communities around these piers that stuck out onto the water. Piers 1 through 6 in particular are the ones where that the park is now designed around, and largely so the neighborhood said, we wanted this is very valuable land for the neighborhood. Instead of having it commercial piers, let's make it into a public park. So when the city and the state, because the state is part of the agency with the Port Authority, made a deal with the city of New York, and they said, okay, we'll make this new entity called Brooklyn Bridge Park, and to pay for this very expensive, this was like a $350-400 million park, to pay for it, we're going to allow some commercial properties to be developed within the park. So it's unlike Central Park, which has no commerce within Central Park. Here they said, in order to pay for this, for the annual maintenance, which is like $15 million a year, plus the cost of the initial cost of the park, we're going to have some long-term leases for properties in the park. And so the part that we were involved in about 5 years ago, the city issued, allowed Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is now an entity unto itself, allowed the Brooklyn Bridge Park to issue an RFP to teams of developers and architects to put forth ideas about what to do in one particular location, because there's about 4 or 5 of these locations. But in the one in particular that this building now sits on, they said, here's a limited piece of land that's up against the street, Furman Street. So it's not on the edge of the water. It's away from the water, but it's still close to the water. It's 1,000 feet long and 100 feet wide. And the only restriction that they gave to the design teams, and this is the only, and is a little bit of a good story to tell, but the only restriction that they put on us, there's no design restrictions, no use restrictions. You could do whatever you want. And the only thing you couldn't do is you couldn't exceed a certain height limit of the roof of the building. It couldn't exceed 100 feet above above what they called mean grade, the ground level at the base of the building. And this is the only, and the restriction was because they created a view corridor. The only restricted view corridor in all of New York City is from the Promenade in Brooklyn Heights, where you can look out to see from the Brooklyn Bridge down to the Statue of Liberty. You have to see to the middle of the East River in those 2 points of land, Brooklyn Bridge, Statue of Liberty, to the middle of the river. You had to be able to see to that line visually. So the building could not encroach on that line. You could have bulkheads that encroach on that line, but not the structure itself. And so we just said, great, let's put in a hotel and a residential building. What we did, I think, in a unique way from why we won the competition, is that we integrated the building and the park. So we said, we want the park to come up inside the building. We want it to come up inside the lobby of the hotel, as you can see here, sort of indoor-outdoor tropical experience. We want it to come up on the outside of the building in terms of terraces and greenery that the building will maintain, so the residential owners of those units don't even have to maintain all those trees and gardens that are up in the air. So right. we said, let's integrate it with the park. That was, I think, our biggest, boldest move. And so we bent the building. We carved elements out of the building so you could walk from the city straight into the park without having to walk around the building. So we created these public pass-throughs, 4 of them in this long 1,000 feet corridor.
When you work on this project, and it's beautiful, do you specify all of the materials as well?
Everything. We have to, because we present a set of documents and specifications to a contractor. They have to come up with a competitive price. So everything has to be specified for that pricing exercise. And some things get changed later, but yes, we like to specify things that are locally made and locally fabricated, or if not, that they can be sourced in a sustainable way. So we chose a natural stone for the outside of the residential portion, which you see here with the terraces growing up inside there, and we chose a way to have all the units have outdoor space, and we chose materials that came from the warehouses that sat on here before this buildings were built. There used to be some old cold storage warehouses with lots of wood beams. This is 1800s construction, so we took all the big wood beams and we recycled them into the flooring materials in the building itself, so you could have a sense of the history of the place. We chose a granite that was from the granite where the Brooklyn Bridge granite was quarried up in Maine. I went up to just south of Augusta, Maine, a little town of Hallowell, to find the old quarry where the granite for the Brooklyn Bridge came from, or parts of it. The whitest and strongest granite in William Roebling's diary, and which we all read, said the whitest and strongest granite I found it in Hallowell, Maine. So that's aha, I'm going to go to Hallowell. And so we we actually found some remnants of the old quarry, and then the vein of that granite is called Quincy granite. So we knew that if we sourced and specified Quincy granite, uh, which is universally found all over the East Coast, that we would be sensitive and playing off of the context of the Brooklyn Bridge, which looms overhead in a very iconic way.
So tell me something. I just want to dovetail onto that for a second and talk to you about your relationship with your fabricators, because if it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like you're trying to match the same granite, but quarried maybe 100 years apart, or fabricated 100 years apart. I would think that you have to have a very special relationship with the fabricators that you're working with.
Well, we rely on the fabricators to actually craft the building, because we're not building a building, we're simply designing it, and it's the craftsmen that make that really make and shape the building, and that's what you feel and touch. So we really rely on the craftsmen and the fabricators for the success of our projects, and so having close relationships and being able to have a conversation about how can we work together is going to benefit the building, and then will benefit the occupants and the people around it. So the 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 fabrication process is vital to the design of the building and to the long-term success. 75 years, 100 years, it's going to last that long because of the care that went into in not just the specifying the materials, but the care in how the materials get brought to the site and then put together. So we're always honoring the fabricators and the workers on the construction site, and working with them, and we answering their questions, which is now so key to in COVID. We did stop construction. There was a moratorium, but people went back to work, and now online questions. It's gotten so much more efficient to a certain degree. A lot. So the building trades. I'll end here, but people have always complained that construction was one of the last things to really change with our new technologies. It's bricks and mortar and masonry and carpentry are the same trades that have been building for thousands of years. How come they're not getting up to speed with the rest of us with all the software that we've got? Well, it's now up to speed, with being able to source things, and being able to design things and have those designs go straight to the factory, have people on site send you digital images. You can overlay a drawing on top of a digital image to show them how to answer that question. So we're there, and I'm again very, very grateful for all the workers that put our buildings together.
And it is really important. Before we jump into Union Square and the vision plan, I just wanted to make a note on that last image that we were looking at. The greenery,
Yeah.
the greenery that carried up onto the balconies with the glass. Thanks, Erica. Just the way that this was put together, I would challenge anyone to say, well, when I think of New York, this is what I think of. This is a very different idea than what I think many would say about New York. And certainly the challenge of adding in the greenery and making it look park-like and comfortable, I just think is simply amazing. And I just wanted to make a note to that, because I feel like the dichotomy is so strong, and the architecture is really what brings that out. It's almost like the more structured you are putting the architecture together, the less noticeable perhaps it is, and by doing so, you've totally accomplished your goal as an urban planner. So I marvelous job. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. It's always the the most successful buildings and projects are when there's the perfect balance and harmony between the structure and the natural systems that we need to be taking into account.
Right. So with that, let's go over to the Union Square vision plan. How did this come together?
This is an incredible conversation that we've been having now for it'll be almost 3.5, 4 years with Union Square Partnership, which is the business improvement district that is in charge of the public spaces, a consortium of the business owners, the residents, and the institutions that occupy this area around Union Square. Very unique part of New York City because unlike, say, Central Park, which is largely surrounded by residential, Union Square is surrounded by mixed use. You know, people living and working and shopping, and NYU and New School, and so hospitals. Everybody's around Union Square. So a lot of really interesting conversations took place and are continuing to take place. And this is where we step in as planners and urban designers and work with the community, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people of all ages at all times of day to what do you want to do here? What improvements can we make? Because the key to the success of any kind of planning effort is listening to the people that use these spaces. So we do a lot of listening and workshopping and then sift through those ideas and come back to the communities, come back to the leadership and executive committees and say, this is what we heard, let's try these things out. So these renderings that you see are all ways to integrate the actual formal square itself with the streets and neighborhoods around it, rather than isolate it with a wall. We're doing the opposite. We're kind of removing the barriers. We're actually, in this image here, you can see we're trying to erase the barriers between the people and the bicycles and the trucks that serve the farmers markets, which, you know, everything gets to be integrated in a more comprehensive way when you have that kind of partnership to lead the team. So the Union Square Partnership Business Improvement District, the BID, was wonderful leadership, and it's ongoing because now, after we brought these renderings to the community and have had some community workshops, now we're getting that final layer of feedback from all the user groups in the square to say, okay, how do you like it? Here's the big vision. Now let's get your reactions, and how can we adjust it and make it even better? And this image here is one of those areas where we're taking a trial to say we're not eliminating cars from New York City. No one wants to do that. That's not what we're attempting to do, but we're just trying to redirect traffic to open up more spaces for people. So here we're redirecting traffic on 4th Avenue so we can actually have and extend the park towards the east in a special way, and not have an isolated island triangle, but really bring that triangle into the park by giving it a link for pedestrians to just have a flow right across and not have roads like Broadway and 4th Avenue cutting it off.
And it feels, again, like everything you're doing is in an effort to craft that 20-minute city that you mentioned before.
Yes.
And as we continue to talk about this, you know, this is the YMCA project in the Bronx. Tell me about this one.
This is an amazing project. There's lots of YMCAs all over the country. YMCA is one of the greatest institutions that we've ever come up with, because it offers through athleticism a chance to get to get into learning and teaching. So we draw in a certain membership of paying people that also allows some of the people who have less money to be able to have memberships at no cost. So there's a mixing of populations, economic sectors, and the Bronx in particular only had one YMCA, despite having an enormous number of people living in the Bronx. There was only one YMCA serving the Bronx. So this is number two, and it's up in the northeast section of the Bronx. So it's serving an underserved community, and it was a 3-acre site that the city of New York owned. And we went to the site and we said, my goodness, this site has never had any buildings on it. It's got all these mature trees. So we actually designed the building around the trees. So you can see that's why these mature tall trees we were able to save. We're not planting little saplings in the hopes that in 100 years they're going to be this tall. We saved those trees and we built the building around the trees. So the building kind of winds its way through the acreage in a very sensitive and delicate way. And the materiality, we spoke about materials, how important they are. Well, that rust-colored base of the building is what it is. It's rusted metal called Corten steel, and Corten steel only looks better over time. The rusting is actually a coating on the building that keeps it from, that makes it stronger and harder, and the color gets deeper and deeper in that kind of orange reddish hue. And then that glowy top portion, and you're looking at the natatorium. So there's pools, there's basketball courts, and then there's a wellness center, which is to the left. They all share the Corten steel, and that glowing top is a material called Calwall, which allows light to come in. So you get sunlight in the day, and at nighttime they glow. And this is one of those connectors that winds its way through the existing trees, connecting everybody to the different pavilions in this site.
I love
These are a couple
the nature of
community planning. And
if hey Judy, there you go. If you could just mute that for us, thank you very much. John, I love, the whole idea of the YMCA kind of fits this new idea of your, and I'm going back to what you said, your idea of a 20-minute city, and providing a space where typically groups of people who are not accustomed to interacting with each other are both interacting within the same space, and it was designed for both equally. And in this case, I'm referring to those who are paying memberships because they have the ability to do so, and those who are given memberships because they don't necessarily have the ability to pay for them. But it's still this cooperative living environment, and it seems like it's supposed to work that way.
Yes. And it does work that way. And we visited, in order to come up with a concept, we toured about a half a dozen existing YMCAs, some more successful than others, so we could learn what's working and what doesn't work in terms of materials, in terms of spaces and heights of ceilings, and how much daylight, and because these buildings they want to be maintenance free, of course. So we learned a lot about by touring what worked and didn't work. Also, the different ages of people. I love the YMCA. They're the communities that they serve are blessed by, and they really do have a broad effect on, and this is a community in Northeast that's been working to get a YMCA for 25 years, and we met the leaders in the community at the groundbreaking who'd worked so hard to, and they were so happy. And these are people dedicating so much time to a civic organization. It just makes you want to cry that people are so committed to helping other people, and the Y was stepped right up, and the city stepped right up, and Speaker Heastie stepped right up, and everybody in terms of the funding that they provided, because it's an expensive building to build.
Yeah, and again, a couple of the things as you're describing it, how you placed it. So the topography and the why it's there, no pun intended, and just how everything was really structured around both the neighborhood, but most specifically around the people who would be there to. And what's interesting too, I just want to point out, it wasn't necessarily crafted the exterior exclusively for the people who were using it, but maybe more so even for the people who weren't necessarily using it. But it wasn't just a big industrial structure in an otherwise, residential neighborhood. So brilliantly done. I absolutely love it. Love it. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
With that, and this time actually, it just flies on us. It really does.
It really does. It's a great conversation, but time does fly when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. With that, I want to thank you, John, very much for coming to the showroom today. Thank you, Walker Zanger, for your support. Erica, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
your support as well. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come out and be part of this conversation. As always, the showroom is a partnership between Walker Zanger and Convo by Design. And if you like this conversation and want to go back and hear it again, it will be published to the Convo by Design podcast outlet. You can get us everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. And if you subscribe, you'll get it automatically. You can also watch the video if you want to see the images again on Walker Zanger's YouTube channel. So with that, thanks everyone for coming out. Erica, thank you. John, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure. And thank you for everything that you're doing for all of us out there. You're really keeping us happy and looking forward to the next one. Thank you.
Absolutely. Enjoy the day, everyone.